My name is Paul Weirwine. I'm a member of TCCN's Event Circle, and I'll be your MC tonight. We're really excited to have our guest speaker, Karen Gibnig, with us tonight for Twin Cities Co-Housing Network's fourth event in its Meet the Professional series. The purpose of this series is to inspire collaboration between people interested in co-housing and Minnesota housing professionals by introducing them to co-housing professionals who can show them the way. Before I introduce tonight's special co-housing professional, board member Becca Brackett will quickly share what we mean by co-housing. Becca?
Thanks, Paul. We need others in our lives. And as Barbara Streisand sang, people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. So that's my thing on what I would hope that co-housing would be for me. So, and then our next slide has to do with the name of our organization, Twin Cities Co-Housing Network. And we want to connect you, dear Minnesotan audience, so you might create small groups who can change the world, which is a paraphrase of Margaret Mead. So in the chat, you will see, if you open the chat, you'll see a link to a place where you can share your basic contact information with others who have attended tonight. If you don't fill out that, you won't get the information on the other people either. So that's what we're talking about when we talk network, is to try to make more connections among people. So back to you, Paul.
Thank you, Becca. So allow me now to introduce Karen Gibnig. Change my sheet here. We're so pleased to have Karen join us this evening. Karen Gibnig is a nationally known group process consultant working with a variety of groups and organizations. She'll be speaking based on her experience of co-housing as a resident and as a professional facilitator who supports groups forming and living in co-housing. With Karen's help, groups find a way to work together in an egalitarian manner. They even enjoy meetings. In her role as a professional facilitator, Karen offers classes and workshops to support co-housing groups across the country as they learn to live together in community. Karen has worked for several years for the Co-Housing Association of the U.S., including serving as its co-executive director. In addition, she co-authored the Cooperative Culture Handbook with Jana Ludwig, making many of the concepts and skills she teaches in classes and workshops available in book form. Karen knows living in community can be challenging. She also knows how powerful it can be in terms of personal growth and living out shared values. I look forward to hearing Karen expand on this, and I'm sure you are too. So please join me in welcoming Karen Gibnig.
Well, thank you for that lovely introduction. It's good to be with you all. And I'm just delighted to be invited. So I guess I should share my screen. We do have some slides to follow along with. Okay. So topic of the evening is top 10 reasons to live in co-housing, which is really just a way to organize the various things I was asked to talk about. Looking at both a little bit about what co-housing is, if that's unfamiliar to anybody, and then a good bit about what I think the benefits are of living in co-housing. Feel free to funnel questions. I think they're going direct message to Becca. And if there's anything that seems immediately relevant, feel free to interrupt me. Otherwise, we'll have plenty of time at the end for questions. All right. And the next slide was to introduce me, but I think Paul already said all that stuff, other than maybe that I live in Washington State. So I'm a few hours earlier in the day than you. But I will move right into the top 10 reasons to live in co-housing. Reason number 10, you get your own private unit. Sometimes people hear the word co-housing and they think commune. And it's not quite that much sharing. It's a good bit of sharing, but not that much. Everybody has in co-housing their own unit. Typically a townhouse, doesn't have to be. Some are individual homes, some are condo type situations. But it is your own. It's typically set up just like any other condo or townhouse or single home purchase within an HOA is generally the setup, although every group, of course, sets their own legal structure. But it means that you can have privacy when you need it. If you have a day that you're just like, today is not my community day, you can go into your own house and not talk to anybody, and that's perfectly acceptable. And it means you have space that you can design the way you want, organize the way you want. Typically the design, if you're in a forming community for cost reasons, everybody has the same countertops typically, or, same layouts, that kind of thing. But once you move in, you put up your colors, you put up your art, you put up your sort of custom light fixtures, things like that. So you can really make it your own. And those private units are also designed to maximize the potential for connection if you want it. So typically, if you're looking out your kitchen window while you're doing the dishes, you're seeing the community go by. Usually the kitchens are toward the front of the house, in that way, bedrooms towards the back, further away from the community. But looking out at community, when I have lived in co-housing, I've been able to wave out my kitchen window at the person in their kitchen window across. And so there is that connection. And of course, you can always close the blinds. So that mix of the privacy, but still availability. So I think that's one of the reasons co-housing works for a lot of people who wouldn't maybe be ready for a commune level of sharing. And there are people for whom communes are wonderful, but for people who think that's a little bit much, knowing you've got your own private unit makes it more accessible for a lot of people. Reason number 9, common areas. Co-housing is built with shared space, typically a common house. And that means that you have a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't have if you just had your own individual house. The most important piece of that is you have space to spend time together. And to me, that's the real value of the common house, is that it is a place where you spend the time together that results in relationships. And you'll notice as I talk, my theme throughout all of this will be supporting relationships, is really why we do this thing called co-housing. And having the common house means you spend more time together. And so anything you do in the common house and anything that pulls people to the common house has the benefit of increasing the relationships in the community. So if somebody goes into the common house to do their laundry, they probably run into somebody else. Maybe they're doing their laundry, or maybe they're in the common house for some other reason. And, some of the time they just go in and do their laundry and leave. But an awful lot of the time, while you're there doing your laundry, you run into someone and how was your day and what's going on? And, oh, I'm going to the theater tonight. Do you want to come? Like this sort of incidental conversation that happens because I took my laundry to the common house instead of doing it in my own home. I will say generally in co-housing, you can do laundry in your own home if you wish to, but a lot of folks use that in the common house. And similarly, there's resources that you don't have to have in your own house. So a lot of people choose to do laundry in the common house for the reasons I already gave, and also because then they can have a nice pantry or big linen closet in what would otherwise be the laundry closet in their house. So that you don't need space in your own home for laundry, for guest rooms, studio space, workshop. There are functions that you might want that you wouldn't want to have to go downtown or even across the street for, but you can go within your community and still have those resources, but you can not have to have them in your own home, and therefore your own home can be smaller than it might be otherwise. And there's space to host the larger community. So you can do the big events and big gatherings, or the broader community outside. So you bring in your book clubs and your political organizing meetings, or your whatever are those things that you do with outside groups. Having a space that is easy to invite them to, actually increases the larger community engagement. So having a common house, or more broadly common areas, because there are outdoor spaces and so on too, is reason number 9 for living in co-housing. Reason number 8, social events. Meals, celebrations, outings. There's all kinds of stuff going on in a co-housing community. Almost every day, there's some version of something that you can attend. Typically, 3 meals a week is common. And generally, we think of meals where a couple of people cook for everybody. And if the whole community does that, then each person might cook as lead cook once a month, and as an assistant or help with cleanup a couple of times a month, and the rest of the time they get to just come and eat. And that's fabulous for not using as much food or having as much food waste, because one big meal, it turns out to be less ingredients than 30 individual meals being cooked. It's fabulous for time. You don't spend as much time in the kitchen unless you want to, of course. People who want to spend extra time cooking are usually welcome to do that. And it's excellent for relationship building. Eating together is a great time for just that casual conversation and that sense of connection. So for a lot of experts in the co-housing field, one of the measures of the health of a co-housing community is how frequently do those meals happen. And 3 times a week is a pretty good goal. Very few do more than that as a regular thing. Very often there will be sort of 3 standard meals a week, and then there may be a special party or gathering or celebration of some sort now and again. The trick-or-treating event at this time of year. Lots of groups do holiday gatherings, and very often a range of holidays. I know of one community that did a Passover Seder one day and an Easter brunch the next morning, and getting everybody's pieces in. So whatever kind of suits the community and what people are up for and organizing. But those things happen, whenever they happen. And then outings happen a lot. And those are not usually formally organized through the HOA of any sort, but it's typically that somebody sends out a message and says, hey, there's this great thing at the theater, who wants to come? Or I want to go to this ball game, who wants to come? And so a person then organizes, and, you carpool and maybe add a meal ahead or whatever. But in a group of 30 or 40 or 50 people, which would be typical for co-housing, odds are pretty good that if there's something I'm excited about doing, if I just reach out to the community, somebody who lives there is interested in doing it with me. And so you have that social engagement as much as you want it. And I will also say, in most communities, there are people who don't attend all the meals, or maybe any of them, but and nobody goes to everything that's on the calendar. Everybody kind of picks and chooses what they like. So having things you can do socially is another great reason for living in co-housing. Which brings us to reason number 7, which is someone else will ... If there is a task that you just don't like, you probably don't have to do it. Somebody else will, not necessarily in your private house, but if you're the person who doesn't like to change light bulbs, frankly, even in your private home, you can probably get somebody else to do it. That there are people who go around and change the light bulbs. There are people who just love doing childcare and having the little ones over. And so there's somebody who does that. There are people who love to lead meetings, and other people who don't want to lead meetings, and so on. And typically in communities, at least some of the utilities are handled in common. So when last time I lived in community, I didn't ever pay an electric bill. I didn't ever pay any utilities. One person in the community did that, but the other 40 some of us did never have to write that check. So there's just a lot of things that normally, as part of maintaining the house, you get the gutters cleaned out and you replace the roof and all that stuff. In most communities, a lot of that is handled communally. Now, obviously, it depends on how each group chooses to set their things up. If the ownership is set up so that each person's maintaining their own exterior, that's up to each community. But in any case, there will be things in community that somebody else takes care of. And of course, for some things, I am the somebody else, right? So there are things I take care of that nobody else has to worry about. So it's not that I don't have to do my share, but if there's a particular task that's just not my thing, I probably don't ever have to do it again. And that's fabulous. Sharing of resources in that way. Reason number 6 is climate change. I think we are all painfully aware of the need to get good at using less energy, using less stuff that takes energy to make and transport, moving ourselves around less. And all of that happens really naturally in co-housing, and it happens intentionally in co-housing. One of the cool things about living so close together is that we share stuff. So I probably don't need my own sewing machine because I can probably reach out and borrow one from somebody in the community. I don't need my own lawnmower because the community owns one, and we use the community one lawnmower for 30 or 40 units, that kind of thing. So there's just less buying. If you don't have the right tool, the right saw, the right sized Allen wrench or whatever, you don't go down to the hardware store and buy it. You go to the community workshop or send out an email, and it arrives on your doorstep with fabulous advice and recommendations attached. This wonderful person who's ready to help you with whatever information you need arrives with that tool in their hand, which of course is much better for the environment than driving to the hardware store and buying a tool in a package or whatever that would be. I have certainly found when I lived in co-housing that a lot of my socialization happened around the community. And so I didn't drive to go meet up with friends. I did things with friends who lived in community. Doesn't mean you'll never see your friends who don't live there again, but the tendency is to drive less. And when you do drive, you're more apt to carpool. Not that you won't have your own car, most people do, but that option to drive less and just the need to leave campus is less present. And of course, the common meals help with that too. Eco-conscious design is a big thing, and it helps that we, as Becca said earlier, we, the people who are going to live in the houses, are involved in the design. So there are things that a developer would never do in the houses they're building because they don't make money on them. It doesn't help them sell them. So why would they put the extra money in? That we, when we know we're the ones who are going to live in it, will choose to pay for because we're going to get the benefit of it. So some of that is insulation and high quality windows and that kind of thing. Although increasingly, I will say the codes are catching up with what we need to be doing. And so depending on what state you're in or what your regulations are where you are, you may or may not be able to afford big upgrades from that. But I do very often see things like higher quality kitchen cabinets. So kitchen cabinets that in a typical multifamily build would need to be replaced in 5 to 10 years because they were cheap cabinets to start with and then wore out. Co-housers tend to put in a better quality of cabinet, willing to pay that upfront cost, and then we don't have to replace our cabinets for a much longer period. So you don't have those things going to landfill, those kinds of things. So there are a lot of decisions that get made that make sense financially when you're the ones that are going to live in it, that are different than what a developer would do. And so that eco-conscious design, both in terms of you buy the things that don't have to be replaced and you buy the things that are energy efficient and that kind of thing. And sometimes some awareness of what type of material is coming in, and that becomes a cost factor. But these are all things that groups talk about and do as well as they can, and far better than any mainstream developer is likely to do. And the other thing that really helps with climate change is that if you live in co-housing, you live around a bunch of other people who care about climate. And so I don't know about you, but I spend a lot of time going, well, what can I do? What would make a difference? How do I help with that? And when you live in co-housing, you're sharing time and space with other people who are also thinking about that. And so you learn what they know, and you get this much larger pool of information. So that sense of being together and neighbors really contributes to just better habits around taking care of the climate. So lots and lots of ways that co-housing helps with climate change. All right, halfway. We'll move on to reason number 5, social, in quotation marks, security. And this is the true security that we actually have. Financial security is great. We all hope for it. But in fact, there is even more important security in being surrounded by people who know you and who care about you. In co-housing, if something goes wrong, I say someone will notice and someone will help, and you can pretty much count on that. I see it happen in a number of ways. I was in my co-housing community one day, and I was probably, I don't know, 100 feet from a kid on his bike when he tumbled. And I raced over to see if he was all right. And by the time I got there, 2 people had come out of their houses to help because they'd happened to see him outside their window as they were in their kitchen or whatever. And that person got taken care of. And, we got him back up. We, put him into the care of the adult in charge of him, that kind of thing. But you don't just sort of fall down and get left. If you're a regular attender at meals and you don't show up, somebody's going to notice that and come knock on your door. And co-housers tend to share emergency information. There's often a standard, if you have medical instructions or emergency contacts or DNRs or whatever you'd want, there's I know one community that said, stick them inside the cabinet door under your kitchen sink. And we know if somebody's in trouble, we go look under their kitchen sink, and that's where we grab them. So whatever your community does, but that kind of shared support is present in a way that it normally wouldn't be. And even just the practice of getting together and eating regularly, if you start to not be yourself or not look right, somebody notices that over time. So you just have the sense of security that you are surrounded by people. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and you need a ride to the emergency room or you need something, there are people you can call and they're right there and they'll be there in minutes. So there's a security in that. And I'll tell you a little secret about this that people don't think about, which is you won't like everybody that you live with in co-housing. And I've certainly lived with people that I didn't particularly choose to spend a lot of extra time with when I was in co-housing. But everybody I've ever known in co-housing could be counted on if there was an emergency. If I needed a trip to the emergency room, if I needed somebody to track down my kid in an emergency, whatever the thing was, anybody that I ran into, whoever I saw first in my community, I could ask for that and they would take care of me. And I knew it absolutely. And that's a security you just don't get in most communities. But it's absolutely there in co-housing, and it's there the day you move in because it's just part of the commitment that we make when we move in. Okay, reason number 4, neighbors. Co-housers are really amazing people. And I just can't think of a group that I find more enjoyable or more likely to be people that I have things in common with. They tend to have lived really interesting lives and in all kinds of different ways. They tend to be community oriented. They tend to be active in all kinds of things going on in the world. And have stories to tell. And you get to see them every day. You don't have to probably, but you tend to run into them. You tend to spend time chatting with them. You don't have to call someone up and make a date and schedule a time and plan a meal in order to have a social occasion. You can just have this quiet, easy conversation kind of anytime. So neighbors are a huge value. And they kind of show up in these next few reasons too. Reason number 3, less loneliness. You may have heard that the medical community has figured out that loneliness is incredibly dangerous to our health and an absolute epidemic. It was an epidemic before COVID. Of course, it was horrible during COVID. And the fact is it remains epidemic, and more so the older we are as we get to retirement, as we get less mobile in whatever way, particularly if we aren't driving, things like that. We get less social. If the only way you can be with other people is to leave home, you aren't probably going to be with other people a whole lot. And in co-housing, you walk out of your private unit, but you don't really have to leave home. And very often co-housing communities are built so that they are wheelchair accessible or easily accessible, even for people with changing mobility. So you can get to the common house, you can get to a neighbor's house just a few steps away, typically. And so that piece of loneliness, it's just not anywhere near as likely in co-housing as it is if you're in your own house and it takes an effort to make anything happen. I want to talk here too about the natural interactions that happen. Even if you don't attend a social event or go to a meal or that kind of thing, just walking to and from your unit in co-housing. They're designed so that we walk to and from the cars, and instead of going into our garage and into our car and away from our house without seeing anybody. We walk through our community. And in doing that, we run into people. We have these little pathway moments on our way to our car or on our way to the common house that can be fabulous conversations. And I say little because sometimes they're 5 minutes, but I've had unintended, unplanned conversations that lasted an hour or more. My kids used to wonder where I went. In fact, I had a friend that I would text and say, she was on the other side of the community. I'd say, oh, I'll be right over. And when I got to her house half an hour later, she says, yeah, you got stuck in traffic again? Yep, I got stuck in traffic. I ran into somebody on the path and stopped to talk. And it took me longer to get there. And that happens all the time. And just that, if you can think of as a way to combat loneliness, just to have those occasional interactions that happen. They also show up with community work. You're on a committee with somebody else, or you're on a cook team with somebody else, or you're both interested in maintaining the landscape garden or whatever. Those times also become social pieces. So you have that shared work that helps with that. I mentioned already the planned social events, but having those things happening around you makes you a lot more likely to do them. At least it does for me. And lots of doors to knock on. You know, if you're just sort of feeling a little lonely and you want a chat, it's absolutely usual in co-housing for people to go up and knock on each other's doors, unless you know them so well that you don't bother to knock and you just walk in. That happens too. So, but to just be that, have that ease that you can just go knock on doors is, again, not something you typically see. Most often in society these days, you have to schedule your gatherings, and you don't have to do that. And all of that really seems to lead to better health. We think people live longer, better, independent lives in co-housing, and it matches with what the medical research is increasingly telling us. So that feels really important to me as a reason to be in community. Reason number 2, co-housing changes the world. And I think people who live in co-housing do more to change the world than certainly I ever was able to do when I didn't. Some of it is joint projects. Typically there's someone in co-housing who, you know, gathers up canned food and takes it to the food bank once a month or whatever it is, or there's somebody who is involved in a particular homeless shelter, or projects I would never know existed, but somebody was interested. And for the project that you may be interested in, it's so easy to reach out to the community and say, you know, hey, we're doing a drive for, you know, we need old suitcases, or we need men's clothes, or whatever the thing might be. It's super easy for people just to drop them off on your front porch. And so you can gather in that way. So whatever those interests are, it's easy to get involved in them in small ways. And it's also easy to have more support for them. So there's this collaborative, making the world a better place thing that happens in co-housing very easily because of the proximity of us living together. And we show the world. So many people will say, I can't believe you live like that. Really? You want to live with 30 or 40 other people? And we say, yes, I do. And we do work together, and we do get along together, and we make decisions together, and it works for us. And people begin to think, maybe that whole individualism thing and the pull my own self up by my bootstraps thing, and, you know, have my own independent space, maybe that's not the only way there is. And if we show people that there are other options, that begins to change how people think and what they expect and what they value. And I think it makes a difference. And then we teach the world. We practice communication, and then we go out into the world with our consensus skills and the things that we learned by being in community. And we take them with us into our faith groups, into our city government, into whatever organizations we're in. We take those skills with us back out into the world and show people how to have more collaborative meetings, more connected spaces, more engaged experiences. And we need that. And because we've learned it in co-housing, we can take it out into the broader world. Which brings me to the number 1 reason, I think, to live in co-housing is personal growth. I become my best self when I am engaged with other people. Now, partly that's because I personally am an extrovert and I just thrive around other people. But what I'm really talking about is that when we're with other people, everything doesn't go perfectly all the time. And I have to adjust who I am and how I behave when I do a thing that doesn't land very well for other people. I can't just walk away from that. I live in that. I've bought a house, they've bought a house, we live there, and we work through it. And in the working through it, an awful lot of healing happens, that my old hurt places heal. And a lot of awareness happens, things that I didn't realize were impacting other people the way that they are. I realize that through the working through it, and I get better. And I learn how I'm landing with other people, so that if I want to, I can change how I'm behaving so that I can have the impact I want to have. I think it happens in co-housing for a lot of reasons. Some of it is just the proximity. We spend enough time together to do that kind of work. I think some of it happens by intention, that where the people we live with are more likely to be willing to do that work with us than if they were just some random neighbor. And I think that makes a big difference. I also think co-housing communities tend to be a pretty safe place for that. Nothing's 100% safe, and I don't want to pretend that it is. But having there be a space where we all know each other and there is a sense of safety and comfort makes it more likely that I can notice, oh, maybe I didn't do that quite right. I should think about doing that a different way. So I think it's an amazing way to be your absolute best self. So that is my most important reason for co-housing. I think we become better people and head out into the world that way. I believe that the organization will share slides, so I'll just let you know that this information is in the slide deck that they will share with you. More of my content is available in these places, including in the winter, I plan to be teaching a facilitation course. Details to come. I'm hoping it'll be through the Co-Housing Association. That is not firm yet, but we're talking about it. I have a podcast with 180 or so episodes, little 20-minute chats that I do with a friend that he and I do that together. The Co-Housing Association blog is a great thing to read. There's a good bit of my work on it, and of course, lots of other contributors as well. And as Paul had mentioned at the beginning, the Cooperative Culture Handbook that Jana and I did together. So that's all more content. And if you just want to reach me, various ways to connect with me, and that will be in the slide deck. And with that, I'm going to stop share. And I'll start with the question that I know is coming because the organizers asked me about. Okay, so there's all this great stuff about co-housing, but how do we get it? How do we make co-housing happen in a place that it's not? And I will say that it's easier to move into co-housing that already exists than it is to build your own. But I think a lot of you live in places where there's not a co-housing community looking for people to join or with homes for sale. And so what do you do if you want to build co-housing from scratch? And I'm just going to talk briefly, but I think a few key things. One is get really clear about why you want co-housing. What is it that you value about it? And how do you value it? And how do you prioritize it? Because the first two things that have to happen to make co-housing happen are you need the beginnings of a group. It can sometimes be actually pretty small, but you need something. And you need land. And the land choice and the gathering of the group both require that you know something about what are the key parameters that you need to be wanting to be in co-housing. Because the third thing that is needed is a passionate person that is willing to kind of be that energy that continues to gather people and that pushes the thing forward. And it doesn't have to be just one person. It's ideal if it's several. And somehow amongst that early group, you need enough money to buy the land and get the thing going. You got to have those resources. So if you had a group of, it doesn't actually have to be that big if there's cash. But if you had a group of 3 or 4 households even that could afford to get some land going, that's a really good start if that group of 3 or 4 households is really clear about what they want and also what they don't need. So people start with, we're going to have a community and it's going to be super environmentally friendly and it's going to have solar panels on every building and we're going to have affordable units as part of it. And we're going to have this, adjacent natural walking trails, and we're going to be walkable to every imaginable resource. I could go on. All the things you imagine people might want. And every criteria like that you add, there's going to be somebody who says that's not what I want and they won't join the group. Or there's going to be some piece of land that doesn't have it and you don't buy that land and therefore you don't get started. So you really want to pare that down. What are our key essential things? What are our key essential values? And gather for those, and don't leave any out, by the way. It doesn't help anything if you build a community that then doesn't work for you. But don't stack it up with every imaginable dream. Get the essentials and then go after the land. And really what you need to get started is enough people to buy the land. And then you'll have a vision, and then pretty quickly you hire an architect and you get to draw the buildings, and hopefully early on you hire someone to help you with the consensus and relationship stuff, because if you have fun meetings that are enjoyable and productive and get lots of things done and you have ways to work through conflict and all that stuff, people will be drawn to the group much more so than if you don't have those things. So hire the professionals that you need and they will tell you the steps from there. So that's my advice. Don't hold too tightly to the perfect. Get really clear on what needs to be good.
Okay, Karen, I have gotten a few questions through the chat.
Excellent.
And one question was, how did your co-housing community deal with varying dietary concerns among the members for the group meals?
That is increasingly a challenge. I think people who did this 20 years ago didn't worry about that nearly as much. The answer is you get really good communication about it. And most groups that have successful meal programs make a really firm commitment that if you have dietary needs, the people making the meals will work with them. And it helps a lot if you're willing to share information. So don't just say I can't eat eggs, but say I can't eat eggs and this substitute egg product is the one that I think works the best. That kind of thing. So I think in general, it's that awareness and willingness. Two other things that I think help with that really a lot. One is simple meals. I have the community I lived in most recently, which was a brand new, super loving community. They just were so excited to live together and they made these fabulous, elaborate meals. And as I left, I said, yeah, don't do that anymore because you'll wear yourself out. And they didn't make as many meals as I think they might have. And they were having a hard time getting people to sign up for meals because they were doing these really elaborate meals. And then if you do the whole elaborate meal, you also have to do that with all the special dietary needs, which just makes it more so. And if you go for a simple soup and bread and some gluten-free crackers, and maybe there's a meat soup and a veggie soup or whatever, the simpler the meal, the easier it is to make that substitution. And the other one that's kind of along the same lines is what I call bar meals: a salad bar, a taco bar, a soup bar, a pasta bar, a baked potato bar, fill in the blank, but something where you're providing a base and then everybody fills their plate with the ingredients that they want is a nice way that everybody can get what they need. But, the vegetarians can have their soy substitute thing, and the people who, your keto diets that really want their meat can have their meat thing, and everybody can kind of get what they need. So I don't think you want every single meal to be a taco bar or a bar type meal, but if you do at least one of those each week, I think that is a very welcoming kind of approach.
Yes. Okay. And one person asked, what do you think is the biggest barrier to more co-housing communities being developed?
Money. Sadly.
Sadly. Okay.
And to say that, I'll say that in a little more depth. I think the cost of construction, the cost of new development, and the cost of housing generally, it's not that co-housing is particularly expensive. It's that the way we go about co-housing is typically new construction, new development, and that's really expensive. It has been, and it's gone up. And there are some contributing factors to that. Some of it is just housing shortage, so it costs more because they can get more. Some of it is zoning. And if you're looking for a way to get more co-housing or just more housing affordability in the world, one of the things that is very local is zoning. And if you have single family zoning, it's single family zoning makes housing more expensive, period. It limits the housing, it limits the density, it pushes the supply down, which pushes prices up, right? So if you're looking for sort of local things to do that help, going after that single family zoning so that you can, I mean, all of it helps over time, but yeah, but the biggest barrier is the money piece. And there's not a lot of great answers to it. I will say that another way to go about it that I don't know of a lot of success stories, because I think the people who do it, you know, we get in that development mode. But I have thought for a long time that it would be amazing to get a group of people together and buy an apartment building. And you wouldn't have, you know, it wouldn't be designed the way that everybody thinks, and you wouldn't have the range of different housing types. There's a lot you'd give up, but boy, you could be moved in 3-4 months, maybe a year. And it'd be a lot less expensive. And, you know, with some, if you want to put some money into it, you could take a couple of units and turn them into a common area or that kind of thing. It wouldn't be the ideal architecture, but if you were willing to do the work to do the social stuff, I think you could get the huge majority of the benefits for a lot less money. But then you have to be willing to move into apartments. Like
Yes.
that, I mean, that's the thing. So there are lots of ways around it, but money's for sure the biggest deterrent.
Okay. One person asked, are there any examples of co-housing communities existing for multiple generations? I think they meant, you know, in the same children of the original thing, of the original group, but also how do children fare in co-housing? Do they feel, I knew a person who was like, you know, the 12th kid or something, and they felt everybody's against me. I'm the young one and everybody's telling me what to do.
I think, you know, we talk a lot about how much seniors benefit from co-housing. I think kids actually tend to benefit even more. And I raised my kids when they were little without co-housing, and we moved into co-housing when they were 10 and 12 maybe. And I saw what it had done for the kids who'd been in that community from early days and what it did for my kids at that age to be in community. But yeah, I think kids benefit tremendously. Doesn't mean they never complain. And I do think that there are generational challenges with kids that particularly if the older crowd is thinking that the kids today are going to be raised by the same rules and expectations that I raised my kids with, for example, right? Like if we think that it's the same now that it was when I was raising kids or when I was a kid or whatever, that can create some challenges. So I think if you want to be multi-generational, it absolutely works. There are lots of communities that work that way. And I think they work incredibly well. I think they're hugely beneficial for children. They're hugely beneficial for children's parents too, by the way, all kinds of ways that it's better. And the community has to want it, and they don't just have to want it in name. They have to want it. They have to be willing to do a little extra work around people who are a little earlier in the learning curve on how to get along with other people. And I remember having to work with my son when we moved in because there was a neighbor who was a little unsteady on her feet. And my son was riding his bike on the sidewalks too close to her. And I said, you can't ride that close to her. You're going to hit her. And he said, I'm not going to hit her. And I said, okay, so you can't ride so close that she's afraid you're going to hit her. Like the problem. And that was learning for him. And as long as she was, you know, willing to let me know what she needed and maybe talk to him and like work through that, everybody wins.
Mm-hmm.
But those things are going to happen. There's going to be trikes on the sidewalk. There's going to be, you know, kids that run into a meeting and interrupt and slow things down, all that kind of stuff. To me, it's an easy trade for having that energy and livelihood and all of that joy in the community. And I think it works incredibly well, but it does take commitment all around.
And can you give one example of how you grew personally through working through conflict?
Oh, wow. Which one to pick? I mean, there are lots. I think one for me was realizing that when I looked around the first community I lived in, and I will say, I went into that community thinking I knew all kinds of things about how the group should work and how consensus should work and how they could fix their meetings. So lesson number one was slow your roll a little. Like, they've been living together a long time, that group had, and I could be right without it being the right thing to do for me to ask for it or demand it or insist on it. So that was one. But another piece was realizing that there were people in the community that I disagreed with a lot about a lot of things. And every one of them had done a kindness to me. And I went, there's room for appreciation here. People are not in categories. People are complex and full of surprises. But when I thought about it, you know, all those people that I've had sort of sharp words with or disagreed with or found difficult, every one of them has been kind to me in some other way, and sometimes some way, and done something meaningful for me. So big lessons in appreciation, I think.
Yes. Someone wants to know, how long should we expect the co-housing community to take to be developed from the idea to the move-in?
Idea to land can be really variable, like 1 year to 20 years. Like that part. If you have a solid core group with some reasonable money and land, I would guess 5 years. I've seen it. There are versions of it that's been done in 3, and it can take longer. I've seen even very well organized groups with land take 7 or 8. Usually hiccups in permitting or zoning or, you know, something or construction or COVID or things happen. But so from land, I estimate about 5 years. That might be overly pessimistic, but the land piece is really variable depending on where you are, depending on how finicky you are. Most groups have to go through a cycle of, you know, they look at a piece of land. Well, it's not perfect enough, so they don't make an offer on it. And then the next one that actually isn't any better, but now they've learned, they go, oh, it'll work for us. We can make it work. Now we're going to buy it. And so kind of how many times you cycle in that makes a big difference, I think.
I see. Well, one person did ask, are there co-housing communities in the Twin Cities? And she's lived here for 20 years, but never heard of it. And I'm going to tell her that there is one called Monterey, and hang around after Karen is done. We're going to do some local talking too. So that's on that. And then do you have experience with co-housing based on the cooperative financial structure?
I know of a few that exist, and I've heard some conversations about them, but I don't personally have experience. It can work. And the thing is that when you say the cooperative financial structure, that is legal terminology that varies by state. So even if you knew of a community in a different state, the rules of how a co-op is defined might be different. The primary upside, I think, is that you have a little more control over who moves in when someone moves out. So the community has a little more control that way. The downside, and I think the reason most communities don't go that way, at least when I've been involved in that decision, the reasons we didn't go that way were increased sort of regulatory requirements. Like there was just a lot more sort of bureaucratic stuff to get it set up. And then getting mortgage lenders on board could be more complicated if there aren't housing co-ops around. And again, if you're in a place like New York City where they're common, then that may not be a problem. But just looking at what happens bureaucratically and also how will mortgage lenders look at it would be reasons to just to ask yourself whether it's actually useful.
And more questions about money in here. How are co-housing communities typically financed? And asking, could you talk about the financial legal aspects, pooling money to set one up, and what's available for people trying to escape the current housing crisis?
Yeah. Okay. So typical. What I see most often is that the group of people who wants to build co-housing forms an LLC, and they're not actually a co-housing group at that point. What they are is a development company. They're a bunch of amateurs trying to develop. And if they're smart, they hire professionals who know how to do this development thing to guide them. And they may even partner with a developer. But the basic financial model is that they are an LLC that is a development company, and people invest money in the development company. And typically they end up investing about 20% of their home price. Some of that has to come in early, and there's usually some some financial incentive, like reductions to home price. So if you put in your money early, you get some financial benefit. Basically, you get paid something along the lines of interest. It's not set up that way, but you get some financial benefit as a payment for the use of your money. But the money that's invested is all at risk. If the project fails at any point, likelihood that money has already been spent on architects and whatever, and you don't get it back. But early on, that doesn't have to be a huge amount, but before you actually dig on the property, usually you need everybody 20% in. So that is the usual. In terms of if you're looking for ways to escape, I already told you one of my favorites, which is largely theoretical, but I think would work, which would be to buy an apartment building, buy older existing housing. It wouldn't have to be an apartment building. That an apartment building just tends to come as all the units in a package. But if you could get, adjoining houses, there are communities who have done that and sort of join the backyards, and maybe there's room for a common house somewhere. The other favorite way, and I'm beginning to hear a few examples of this, is most communities have some larger homes as part of their development. And those larger homes are a fabulous fit for roommates. And even people who don't know each other all that well, or, you don't have to have been lifelong friends, you don't have to be in the same family. You can, without being married or besties or whatever, you can say, hey, we both really want to live in co-housing, and we've talked to each other enough to know we can live together okay. And, if one of us is a slob, we both can live with that. Or if one of us is a neat freak, we can both live with that, or whatever the thing is. And share a larger unit, or for that matter, a smaller one, depending on how much you can share. But in most communities, Riversong that I lived in, I'll give as an example, it's in Eugene, Oregon. And the largest units were 4 bedrooms, 3 full baths. So it would be possible for someone to have a dedicated bedroom and bathroom. 3 different people could have had their own bedroom and bathroom, basically, with an extra bedroom to spare. And that unit cost less than twice as much as the smallest unit. So if those 3 people had each wanted to buy their own unit, they would have needed a lot more money to do that. So if you're willing to share a little more than what you would if you just had your own 2-bedroom unit, say, you can save a lot of money that way. So if you're needing to get in through the finances, that kind of thing is the best strategy I know of.
Okay. One person asked, is working on group process something a forming group should factor into its discussions and its budget, such as hiring a professional like yourself?
Well, I'm obviously incredibly biased on this one, but yes. And I can give you references of clients who have done that, and they will tell you that it's, really, really worthwhile. What I think is true is that we grow up in a society, certainly if you went to public school in the US, you grew up in an environment that was very hierarchical, very competitive, very individualistic, and an awful lot about how we learn to get along with each other, even how we learn to run meetings, how we learn to lead discussions, all that stuff is not ideal for consensus decision-making and living together and building high trust and all that kind of thing. And getting some help with how to do that really well gets you more trust earlier. It gets you faster connections, which helps a lot. There are a lot of ways to build strong connections. Disasters are one of them. Construction projects are another, but I just assume that wasn't in the disaster column for you. But going through these really high stress situations, or you can get with somebody who knows how to facilitate those things and do the trust building exercises and put better communication structures in place and put better meeting structures in place. And I think it helps both that you have a better, more satisfying experience and that you become more desirable. There's something about attending a meeting and you just get this sense of everybody's really connected and everybody listens to each other and everybody has this strong sense of belonging. You can feel it and people go, I want that. And all of a sudden they don't
Mhm.
care about their own house anymore. They just want in. They just want that. And so, yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So I think we're getting towards the end, but I'm going to combine two little questions here.
Sure.
And one person said, is it fairly easy to sell your home if you have to move quickly for whatever reason? But the other question was that multi-generational, they were talking about sustainability of the community, as in the founders' children's carrying on the torch. And I think there are some in Denmark that were, nobody wanted to leave. And so then there really wasn't any space for the next generation to join. But what about that longevity and turnover?
Yep. So there tends to be turnover. I think co-housing houses sell usually more easily than the broader market. On the other thing, everything that makes it, like mortgage rates are really high right now. That makes it harder to sell a house. It's true for a co-housing house as any other house. But I think co-housing does tend to increase in value. And I think communities can help with that, like have a resale program, be giving tours, be inviting the community in to see it so that people see how wonderful it is. And then when it's time to sell your house, you're more likely to. And yes, I think the handing it on generation to generation, like literally the same children, we're just such a mobile society that I haven't seen a lot of that. I think the kids, they end up living where they went to college or where they get a job or where they found their sweetheart or whatever. So there are a few cases of kids that come back, but what you're saying about not having space available when a young family wants to buy in, I think that does happen. We call them naturally occurring senior co-housing, so multi-generational communities, but the kids grow up and move away and the parents are there until they die. And that takes a while. And so you end up with largely seniors. So, and we tend to start out senior heavy because seniors are the ones with the money to do the financing. So that tends to happen. But there's certainly no reason it couldn't be that kids moved in. And of course, in some of those larger homes, you could have multi-generations within the same household, potentially.
Very true. Mm-hmm. Well, I really think that's probably wraps up our questions. We've really enjoyed hearing you and moving up from the 10 to the 1.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. It's good to see you. I recognize a few names.
And I'm turning it over to Paul.
Sounds good.
Well, I too want to just say, Karen, that was just completely fascinating and interesting and so full of great examples. And you didn't sugarcoat stuff either. So that was awfully nice. And I want to encourage people to stick around because there's more good stuff to come. But let's give Karen a big show of appreciation as we say goodbye, or if you want to put a cool emoji up, please do that. But Karen, really appreciate your generosity in being with us tonight and sharing your wonderful expertise and good heart.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you
Bye,
so
Karen.
much.
Bye.
Bye now. So we are going to continue our meeting tonight with our event tonight with various things. Please stick around if you want to learn more about TCCN and Minnesota Co-housing. Let's hear right now from directors Lee and Lynn on TCCN. Lee, would you please take it from here? You're muted, Lee.
There we go. Excellent. Well, this is our mission. Recently, we expanded out into the entire Minnesota area, although we continue to be Twin Cities Co-housing Network. We are exploring changing our name. To the next slide. So TCCN governs using sociocracy as a democratic decision-making and organizational model where all voices are heard by consenting on decisions together. Our board is also known as the Vision Circle, with members and offices listed here. This event was put on by the Event Circle. It's a subcircle of the Vision Circle. And here are the current members.
Paul, you are muted. Paul,
Sorry. Thank you, Lee. Lynn, would you like to talk a little bit more about if folks want to get more involved and connected around co-housing?
Thanks, Paul. Twin Cities Co-Housing Network is proud to be a Coho US community member, which means we support our national co-housing organization. And we do that because they offer tremendous amount of training, resources, and wonderful learning opportunities for us. And we want to extend those to others who are interested in co-housing in Minnesota. So we also create a TCCN community member program, and that member program offers access to resources provided by Co-Housing US. And you can become a TCCN community member and reach that access with any gift of $60 or more to TCCN in a year, and by completing a member application form. We ask you to complete this application form because our service area is the state of Minnesota, and we don't want members of co-housing communities who could become members, who could receive this access through their own co-housing community or from people in other states who could become individual members at Coho US. So complete our application form, and then the special benefit of providing a generous contribution at this time of the year is any new member approved after October 1st will have access for essentially 15 months through December 31st, 2024. And there are many, many reasons, that benefits that this access provides. You get free access to all online learning events, $100 off of the 2024 National Conference, Co-Housing Conference, which this year is being held in Denver, Colorado, and 25% off trainings and coaching through the Co-Housing Institute. So for example, the training that Karen mentioned she's working with them for would be offered at a fee that you would have a 25% discount for. And again, there's over 200 recorded event sessions that you can search by topic. And you then are also can feel good for supporting Twin Cities Co-Housing Network as a contributor to our organization, and know that you are also supporting our national organization. In addition, if you want to be involved in TCCN, we have many, many opportunities for you to volunteer with us, either just a little bit by creating maybe a poster or a flyer, or by doing a little bit of help at a particular event, volunteering with us for one event, or by becoming a member of one of our circles. And you can give us a try, but to see if your talents are a good fit for our organization. You can join us on Zoom and observe how our circles work, which help us see if we are a good fit for each other. And you can also observe our sociocratic governance and decision-making process, because that is how we operate as an organization. And we are trying hard to put together learning opportunities to help onboard new volunteers who wish to join one of our circles. So I will be sending out an email to everybody who registered for the event, and it will have a link to the recording. And in addition, you will have links for making a contribution, information about partnership, and other information about our organization, including the PDF that Karen mentioned for her presentation. So I'll stop sharing and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lynn. And I should note that Lynn and Lee have been doing a lot of tech stuff that just has made this work. And I think we want to give them a little shout out right now. That takes a lot of know-how and some courage. The attendee list, again, you can check out the chat for the link for that, and you will be able to fill out that form after this event, and it will be distributed to those who fill out the form after October 23rd. So now we would like to have a period of additional questions that people might have that our board can field on co-housing in general, plus updates on what different groups are trying to do in terms of starting co-housing communities in our service area. And if you do have a question that you want to pose, why don't you just raise your hand? There's a tab down at the bottom where you can raise your hand and we'll call on you. And we'll also launch into some updates in terms of groups that are working to become communities, starting with Becca. Would you like to talk about Cedar?
Okay, thanks, Paul. Cedar Co-housing is a group that wants to form a co-housing in an urban area in the Twin Cities, including first ring suburbs. We're definitely involved or wanting to pursue the energy efficiency and close to transit, reducing our carbon footprint and increasing our social connection. So that's kind of our goal. And I'll put our webpage is www.cedarcohousing.llc, because as Karen said, that's how you start, is you form an LLC, and we've done it. So, and we're hoping, actually we're having a coffee get together at the Caribou Coffee that's near Lake Bedemakaska on the northwest corner near the Whole Food store. There's a Caribou Coffee, and we're going to be there Saturday the 14th at 10:30. And anybody who wants to join me there, we'll talk.
Thanks, Becca. Chris, do you have a question you want to ask? And we'll do more updates, group updates, but Chris, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you. This has been great. Appreciate. I know that there's a lot of time, energy, heart that goes into this, so I respect you all for that. Are there any forming communities, and maybe I'll learn about this as you talk more about some of the forming ones, but that are oriented around kind of young families? I mean, we have a 3.5 month, a month old, and just curious kind of if there's anybody trying to have that be an emphasis of the community.
Well, I can't speak. Maybe there's people on this meeting that actually have that interest that would like to weigh in. I know that there are two groups in the Twin Cities that we've seen at events. And if you want to reach out to one of the volunteers here, we can get you connected. There was a group that was kind of centered around White Bear, St. Paul area, and another Minneapolis one. I haven't heard how that group, that would be Rachel, was involved in that. Becca or Lynn, Becca or Lynn, do you want to update on what you know in that regard? You're muted, Lynn.
I don't have any further information.
Well, Cedar has said we want to be multi-generational, but we only have one household that has a child, and she's getting to be a teenager. So, but there was a small group in White Bear Lake who have children, and they wanted to do co-housing I don't know, where they're at the present time, but we certainly can connect. That's one of our goals, TCCN, is to connect people. So, we can try to do that.
That'd be great. Thanks, Becca.
And I do know that Becca's Cedar Group, they would love to just have all sorts of kids running around, right, Becca?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Mary, would you like to ask your question? You're muted.
Here. Hi, thank you so much for this group.
Yeah.
I'm interested in starting a group for
Mhm.
families. I have several grandchildren. My daughter has 5 children, and I am very much involved in helping with a lot of things to support these children. And I live in a neighborhood where there are other mothers who have asked for additional support as well and have wanted to move into one of the, I have a couple of homes that are, one's a duplex and one's a triplex. And they've at times, I've had a couple of people that have wanted to move in, and I've thought about maybe setting up the homes in that sort of way to support mothers and families. But I need to kind of connect with some additional people, because I wouldn't be able to do this just on my own, but I have some of the basic things to get going. But I was so happy when I saw this information at the library the other day, and it's the first time I've ever joined in one of these meetings, but I'm interested in starting a community, I guess, to support young single mothers and even just young families in general, because I think that supportive communities can be so beneficial for a lot of reasons, for social reasons and for financial reasons and educational reasons and a whole bunch of reasons. Actually, I think the idea of all working together in a group would add a lot of benefit to people who, I guess, don't necessarily have the extended family support. I tend to provide that for a lot of children right now, and it's a full-time job for me. But working together with many people, I think, would be.
Well,
I'd like to learn about connecting with people. There's a program in St. Paul where I live,
Mhm.
and it's called the Jeremiah program. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily this type of program, but it's a model that I am wanting to work with and expand upon. I've been to Seattle to actually visit a similar co-housing program because I heard about it on National Public Radio a couple of years ago and went to visit it, and I thought this would be a really great idea to start here. So I'm in.
Well, I am really happy that you're here, Mary, and that you spoke up. I think it begins by, if you're interested, putting your name in the chat so that
Sure,
like-minded people can
Yeah.
contact you.
Yeah,
Getting on that attendee list, which again, you go to the form that we're putting in the chat, and you can fill out that form after this meeting, and we'll send out, the attendee list after that. But anyone who wants to respond to Mary directly via chat, please do. We've opened it up so that people can chat to anyone they want. I don't know if that helps, Mary, but
Oh, sure. Thank you.
I do want to mention that both the website of TCCN
Okay.
and the Co-Housing Association of the United States, especially the Coho US, the resources there are quite phenomenal.
Okay, good. Today's the first time I've learned about them, so thank you so much for sharing
Yes.
that.
And back to what Lynn was saying, a minimum $60 donation opens the
Yeah.
doors to a lot of
Absolutely.
Coho US resources. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, good. That's very good to know.
So other group updates, raise your hand if you would like to share. My name is Paul Weirwine, and I am very interested in senior co-housing. We are slightly inactive at the moment, but our vision is to be somewhere in the 7-county Twin Cities metro area, to be quite affordable, to have a little bit of open space for gardens and hopefully a dog run, and to just be really not super enmeshed with each other, but to have a community of mutual support. And if you would like my information, I'll put it in the chat, or if you want to leave me your information, I would like to talk with you. Oh, Lee.
Hi there from Duluth. I founded a senior group called Active Adult Co-Housing for the Northland. It's listed in the Coho US directory, so you can get some details about the vision, my vision, actually. We have an exciting development up here in Duluth, kind of in line with Karen's talking about buying apartment buildings. The city has launched a 5-year plan to convert our empty office space into housing in the downtown area. So join me in exploring this opportunity. I'm the organizer of a meetup called Co-Housing for the Northland. It's free to join. We are meeting on Zoom once a month, and I'm putting the link into the chat right now.
Thank you, Lee.
Mm-hmm.
How about what else do people want to know about co-housing? Anything that you're just kind of not sure whether you should ask, but go ahead and ask. You can either unmute or raise your hand. Any takers? Okay.
Oh,
You were going to say something, Lee?
well, I was going to ask Kid Shear if he wanted to talk about his vision that he's put into the directory.
Yeah,
Hi,
go-
you guys.
Hi.
So, thank you. I have a piece of property in north central Minnesota that I'm interested in finding ways to offer for small co-housing. I see it more as tiny homes moved in to create a central community with walkways and solar lighting and that sort of thing. But I would also like to say that near Fergus Falls, I have a friend who owns 170 acres of very picturesque farmland, who wants a co-housing community on his land
Wow.
to share the resources. His resources are a wooded area with hunting ability, probably like half a mile of riverfront for fishing, the agricultural output of that farmland, and just the chance to be out in the open air in a much more rural area. So be aware when you're doing co-housing, visualizing that outstate tends to be underrepresented. It's people don't look out this far. Everybody thinks that they want to be in the Twin Cities or Rochester or maybe Duluth because that's where the action is. But the beautiful quality of life can be had in the far out state, and that's where most of the state of Minnesota is away from the metro areas. So I would be happy to talk with anybody. I'm certainly just in the listening stage and in the planning, maybe early brainstorming stages, but I would be happy to talk with anybody who's interested in co-housing in a rural area with an agricultural base to it or a horticultural base to it. Lee was nice enough to ask me to say hello, and I'll make this point, which is that agricultural land is going to be turning over in a high volume in the next 10 years, and there's big concern nationally about how that land is going to be affordable to young farmers. It's a large problem. So there are agricultural groups that are working on trying to figure out this transitioning. And some of the only way that that could possibly happen is if there was cooperative ownership and co-housing to make smaller plots of land affordable. You guys could be considered to be on the forefront of what could be happening in agriculture if you'd like to open up to conversation for farmland and agriculture too. And I can kind of give you some thoughts and direction on that. So thanks for including me. That's about all I've got to say right now. But there is opportunity in the outstate, and don't shy away from considering that.
So Kent, please put your information into that form. If you click into the chat, you can fill out the form and then other people can contact you.
You bet. Sure. Yes, and thank you, you guys. It was a wonderful presentation. I'm going to be staying connected with everything that you're offering, and just kind of keep in the loop.
Great, thank you, Kent. Lee, you have your hand up?
Yeah, Kent, technically speaking, we have 2 co-housing communities in greater Minnesota. They were set up around the same time as Monterey. One's called Wiskoy and the other's called Zephyr. And they're ag co-housing communities. They haven't joined our network at all, but you can find one of them on the co-housing directory, and you can find both of them on the Foundation for Intentional Community directory.
Lee, would you give me that? I got Wiskoy, and what was the other one?
Wiskoy and Zephyr.
Okay.
They don't talk to us much, but one calls itself co-housing, and the other on the Foundation for Intentional Community directory calls itself co-housing, but they aren't on the co-housing directory. So it's kind of like you have to look at both directories.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And as I said, I'm more than delighted to talk with anybody, especially by email or by Zoom, just brainstorming along these lines.
I don't mean to get technical here, but one distinction between co-housing and other forms of intentional community is, generally speaking, there is no shared economy with co-housing. Shared economy in the terms of like a jointly owned and operated farm operation. So just to avoid confusion around that.
Well, that's not true.
But there are some, and
There's
there's
Ithaca.
Okay.
some that a small group of the people in the co-housing run a particular enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rules against it. It's just the general concept of co-housing is they're not generally is not shared economy. Well, I think maybe we're at the end of our evening, unless anyone has any quick question they want to throw out, or did we miss anyone who wants to give a group update? Okay. Well, it was really lovely that you all could be here. It really was a joy to hear Karen, and having you all here made it worthwhile to invite her to speak. We couldn't. TCCN relies on volunteers, and we really would love to have you get involved if you're so inclined. Thank you all for coming, and be sure to look for your email that will be coming out very quickly. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you behind the scenes volunteers, really appreciate it. And to you, Becca, for fielding the questions. Good night, everybody.